My daughter-in-law grabbed my arm in the kitchen doorway and said, "Your cabin is sitting empty all winter. My parents need somewhere warm to stay. We already told them yes." I smiled and said, "Okay, we'll figure something out." She thought that meant I'd surrendered. She was wrong. Let me back up a little. I'm 63 years old. Retired now after 31 years as a structural engineer with the county. Bridges, overpasses, highway underpasses. I spent my career calculating what things could hold and what would make them fail. My name is Bernard Kowalski, and I spent the last 4 years of my working life quietly saving every spare dollar so I could buy the one thing I'd wanted since my 30s, a cabin on Flathead Lake in Montana. Not enormous. 2 bedrooms, a loft, a wood stove, a covered porch that looks straight out over the water. I bought it 14 months ago with cash. No mortgage, no partner, no compromise. Just me and the deed and the keys and the kind of quiet that comes when you've earned something completely on your own terms. My son, Elliot, visited with his wife, Renata, the first weekend I had the place. I cooked steaks on the porch grill and we sat out after dark watching the water. It was a good night. Elliot seemed genuinely happy for me. Renata was polite. She walked through every room twice, which I noticed but didn't comment on. "It's smaller than I expected," she said when she came back outside. "It's exactly what I wanted," I told her. She smiled the way people do when they're already thinking about something else. 3 months later, in early November, she called me. Not Elliot. Her. "Bernard, I wanted to talk to you about the cabin before the holidays." Her voice was bright, the way it gets when she's decided something. "My parents are going to need somewhere to stay through the winter. Their furnace died and the repairs are going to take months apparently. We thought, Elliot and I agreed that your cabin would be perfect. 2 bedrooms, you're not using it much in the cold months anyway." I held the phone and looked out my apartment window at the bare trees. "Renata," I said, "I do use it in winter. That's actually my favorite time to be up there." "Oh, but you could work around it. They just need it January through March, maybe into April." "That's 4 months." "Well, yes, but it's not like you're renting it out." "I'm not renting it out because it's mine," I said. "It's not a rental property. It's my home." A pause. "Then it's a second home, Bernard. You have your apartment here in Missoula. The cabin is still mine. I'd need to think about this." "What's there to think about?" The brightness dropped slightly. "My parents are in a difficult situation. You have the space. It's the right thing to do." I told her I'd call her back. She hung up before I could finish the sentence. Elliot called that evening. He sounded tired. "Dad, I know Renata already talked to you." She did. Her parents are really struggling. The furnace thing is real. They're looking at a big repair bill, and they can't afford a rental on top of that. I asked him how old her parents were. He said her father, Denny, was 68, and her mother, Lorraine, was 66. I asked if they were working. He said Denny had a pension from the railroad and Lorraine did bookkeeping part-time. "Not rich," he said, "but not destitute." "Elliot," I said, "I understand they have a problem. But the solution isn't my cabin. I didn't buy that place to house other people. Just for the winter, Dad." "That's what your wife said. But 4 months in my cabin, using my firewood, my utilities, my water system, that's not a small favor. And once someone's living in a property, even temporarily, it creates legal complications." He was quiet. "Did you know that?" I asked. "Once they establish residency, even without a lease, Montana law gives them tenant protections. Getting them out, if something went wrong, could take months in court. Nothing would go wrong, Dad. They're good people." "I'm sure they are. The answer is still no, Elliot. I'm sorry." He sighed, long and heavy. "Renata's going to be really upset. I understand that, but this is my property, my decision." "I'll call you later," he said. He didn't call back that night. Renata called the next morning. She didn't bother with brightness this time. "I talked to Elliot and he said you refused." I said no, yes. Bernard, I want you to understand something. My parents don't have options right now. They've called every hotel, every short-term rental. Everything is either too expensive or too far from Denny's cardiologist in Kalispell. That was new information. I didn't know Denny had a heart condition. He had a stent placed in October. He needs follow-up appointments. Kalispell is 45 minutes from your cabin. It would be perfect. I heard what she was doing. She was adding layers, making the situation more serious, more specific, more morally weighted with each call. This was not an accident. Renata, I said, I'm sorry Denny is dealing with health issues. That's genuinely hard. But the answer to your problem is not my cabin. The answer is finding a furnished rental in Kalispell where they can be close to his doctors without depending on someone else's private property. Furnished rentals there run $1,200 a month. They can't afford that. Then family helps them with costs. That's what Elliot and you could do. You could help them pay for a rental. That's a real solution. What you're asking me to do is a different thing. Silence. You're being very selfish, she said finally, flat. No pretense. I'm being clear, I said. There's a difference. She hung up. That afternoon, I called my old friend Stuart Drummond. We'd worked together for 20 years at the county before he retired and went into property law. I didn't need a formal consultation. I needed a conversation with someone who knew what I was dealing with. Classic pressure escalation, Stuart said when I finished. They'll keep raising the moral stakes until you cave or they find another angle. What's the legal exposure if I just say no? It's your property. You have no obligation. Zero. But here's what you watch for. If they show up and you let them in, even for a night, and they claim they were invited as residents, you're in landlord-tenant territory. Don't let them cross that threshold without a written agreement specifying they have no tenancy rights. Better yet, don't let them in at all. What if they just show up? Stuart was quiet for a moment. Then you have a trespassing situation, which you handle with a phone call to the county sheriff. I thanked him. After I hung up, I sat in my kitchen for a long time. I built my entire career on understanding failure points, where structures gave way under load, where the math stopped working. I recognized the pattern here. Renata wasn't going to stop. The question was not whether a confrontation was coming. The question was whether I'd be ready for it. I drove up to the cabin that Friday. I spent the weekend doing 3 things. First, I documented the cabin's condition. Every room photographed, every appliance serial number recorded, every item of furniture cataloged. If anyone was going to claim later that something was damaged or missing, I'd have a baseline. Second, I called the Flathead County Sheriff's Office and had a brief, factual conversation with the deputy named Alicia Crane about civil standby procedures. She was matter-of-fact professional. She told me what I needed to know. Third, I drove to a hardware store in Kalispell and upgraded the gate lock at the end of my driveway. The old combination was 6 years old. I set a new one and didn't share it with anyone. I went home Sunday evening feeling something I recognized from the job. Not excitement, not anger. The particular calm that comes when you've run the calculations and you know the structure will hold. The week before Christmas, Renata called again. Elliot was in the background somewhere. I could hear him moving around. Bernard. Her voice had shifted into something softer, more deliberate. I want to apologize for how our last conversation ended. I was frustrated, and I wasn't fair. Okay, I said. I just want you to know that Denny and Lorraine are really suffering. It's hard to watch your parents struggle, especially at the holidays. You understand that, don't you? I said I did. So I'm asking again. January through March, maybe April. Just give them a chance to get the furnace fixed and get back on their feet. My answer hasn't changed, Renata. A pause. When she spoke again, the softness was gone. Elliot and I talked about this. We've decided that Denny and Lorraine are moving into the cabin on January 3rd. We've already told them. They've already made arrangements. This is happening, Bernard. We're not asking anymore. I let that sit. All right, I said, a breath on the other end. All right? I heard you. January 3rd. Okay. Relief in her voice, surprise even. Okay, good. Thank you. Really. We'll talk before then, I said. We said goodbye. We'll talk before then, I said. We said goodbye. I hung up and sat there a moment, and then I picked up the phone and called Stuart Drummond back. The week between Christmas and New Year, I drove back up to the cabin. I met Stuart there. He'd driven up from Missoula as a favor, and he brought a notarized document he'd drafted, a formal notice of denied access, specific to the property, dated and witnessed. We walked the perimeter together. I showed him the new gate, the camera I'd mounted on the porch post covering the driveway, the secondary camera over the front door. You're prepared, he said. 31 years of load calculations, I told him. You don't skip steps. He laughed. We had coffee on the porch even though it was 28 degrees. The lake was gray and still. There was maybe 2 inches of snow on the ground, and it felt like peace. Real peace. The kind nobody had handed me. I wasn't angry at Renata. I want to be honest about that. I understood what she was doing. She loved her parents, and she'd found what looked like a solution, and she was pushing until it worked. I understood the logic. But understanding someone's logic doesn't mean accepting the conclusion. January 2nd, I drove back up, checked every camera, walked the property, made sure the gate was locked. January 3rd, 11:14 in the morning. The cameras picked up a truck coming down the access road. I was standing outside the gate when they pulled up. Renata's parents in a gray pickup with a small trailer behind it. Renata's SUV behind them. Elliot in the passenger seat. He hadn't warned me. He'd known and he hadn't called. That landed harder than I expected. The pickup stopped. The window came down. Denny looked at me, then at the gate, then at the deputy sheriff's cruiser parked 10 yards back. His face went very still. Renata got out of the SUV before anyone else moved. She looked at the gate, the deputy, me. Something shifted in her expression. The plan, meeting reality. Bernard, what is this? I'm protecting my property, I said. We talked about this. You said all right. I said I heard you. I didn't say yes. I kept my voice level. Deputy Crane has a copy of my notice of denied access. This property is posted. Denny and Lorraine, I'm sorry you drove out here. I genuinely am. But you were told this was arranged without my consent. I did not agree. Lorraine had gotten out of the passenger side. She was looking around with an expression I recognized. Not anger, but bewilderment. She hadn't known the details. Renata had told her it was settled. This is unbelievable, Renata said. She turned to Elliot. Say something. Elliot stood by the SUV. He was looking at the ground. Elliot, I said. He looked up. You knew I said no. You let Renata tell her parents it was arranged. You let them rent a trailer and drive out here. That's what you chose. He didn't say anything. Deputy Crane walked up quietly, stood a few feet behind me. Her presence wasn't aggressive. It was just there. Your father has every legal right to deny access to his property, she said. He's provided proper notice. If anyone attempts to enter past that gate without his permission, that's criminal trespass. I'd encourage everyone to head back and make other arrangements. Denny spoke for the first time. His voice was quiet and tired. Nobody told us there was a disagreement. I looked at him. I know. I'm sorry. Lorraine put her hand on his arm. She looked at Renata. Whatever passed between them, it wasn't small. Renata's jaw tightened. She looked at me with something I can only describe as cold. You're going to regret this, she said. You're going to be alone up here, and you're going to regret every bit of this. Maybe, I said. But I'll be alone in my own place. That's what I bought. She got back in the SUV. Denny and Lorraine turned their truck around without speaking, the trailer swinging wide on the narrow road. Elliot had got in the passenger seat and didn't look back. I stood at the gate until the sound of their engines faded completely. Deputy Crane walked up beside me. You handled that well. I've had time to prepare. She nodded, got in her cruiser, and pulled out. You had time to prepare. She nodded, got in her cruiser, and pulled out. I unlocked the gate, drove in, and parked in front of the cabin. I sat in the truck for a moment looking at the lake, gray and cold and completely mine. The calls started that evening. Renata, 6 times. I let them go to voicemail, each one angrier than the last. Manipulative. Cruel. You've humiliated my parents. Elliot loved you, and you've destroyed this family. You're a bitter, selfish old man who's going to die alone in that cabin, and nobody will care. I saved every one of them, transcribed the key language into a document. Noted times, dates, content. 31 years of documentation habits don't disappear at retirement. Elliot called twice. His messages were different, quieter. He said he didn't know what to say. He said he was sorry. He said he was sorry. He said he thought it would just work out. I listened to his messages 3 times. Then I saved those too. The pattern I'd seen in Bridges held here. Pressure finds the weak point. Elliot was the weak point in Renata's structure. He didn't believe in what she was doing. He'd just gone along with it because it was easier than stopping her. I'd been that kind of easy before, in smaller things, and I knew where it led. 2 weeks into January, a certified letter arrived from a law office in Missoula. I recognized the tactic before I even opened it. Renata's family had found an attorney. The letter claimed I had an implied agreement to provide housing based on my acknowledged response to Renata's proposal, and that by denying access I had caused financial harm, the rental trailer cost, the aborted move, lost deposits. I called Stewart the same afternoon. "It's noise," he said. "There's no implied contract from I heard you. No court is going to find an agreement where you explicitly and repeatedly refused and the other party simply decided your answer meant yes. Can they cause me real trouble? They can file. It costs you time and money to defend. That's the threat." He paused. "But you documented everything. I have every call logged, the voicemails, the gate camera footage showing the date and time of the attempted entry, Deputy Crane's civil standby report." "Then you're in a stronger position than most people who come to me." He was quiet a moment. "I'd send a response letter through me. Official. It signals you're not going to fold. Most of these fishing expeditions stop at the first sign of actual preparation." The response letter went out 4 days later. Factual, calm, documented. It included a line noting that we were preserving all records of communication, including voicemails for potential harassment claims under Montana statute. Renata's attorney did not respond. The calls stopped. February was quiet at the cabin. I went up 3 weekends in a row. Snow showed the ridge trail behind the property, red in the evenings by the wood stove. Watched the lake go from gray to silver in the late afternoon light. I thought about Elliot a lot during those weeks. Not with anger, with something more like grief. He was 41 years old, and he was a decent man who'd made a series of small choices that added up to a large one. He'd let his wife push his father off a cliff, and he'd stood there watching. I didn't know yet whether that was something we'd come back from. In late February, he sent a text. "Just, Dad, can we talk?" "Just us." I waited 2 days before I responded. Not to punish him, because I needed to know what I actually wanted to say. I called him on a Sunday morning with the lake visible from my kitchen window. He answered on the first ring. "I'm sorry," he said, before I could speak. "I should have told you when she made the plans. I should have stopped her before it got to that point. I didn't, and that was wrong." I let that settle. "Why didn't you?" I asked. A long silence. "Because it was easier not to. Because she was going to be angry either way, and I thought, I don't know what I thought, that you'd go along with it, that it would just work out somehow." He exhaled. "That was cowardly, Dad. I know that." I looked at the lake. "I raised you to take up space," I said finally, "to have a position and stand in it. I don't know when you stopped doing that." "I know. A lot. I love you." "That doesn't change." But I need you to understand something. The cabin isn't just a building. It's what I worked for after your mother left. It's the first thing in 30 years that was completely mine. No negotiation, no compromise. When Renata decided she could give it away, she wasn't just asking a favor. She was treating something I'd built my life around like it was hers to offer. He was quiet for a long time. She didn't see it that way. I know she didn't. That's part of what concerns me. We talked for almost an hour. About small things eventually. He told me about a project at work. I told him about the snowshoe trail. When we said goodbye, it felt not repaired, but open, like a door that had been stuck was now just closed and someone might try the handle again. March came. I learned through a mutual acquaintance that Denny and Lorraine had found a furnished apartment in Kalispell, 2 bedrooms, month-to-month lease, $1,400 a month. Elliot and Renata were helping with half the rent. The furnace on their house had been repaired by mid-February. They'd be able to go home in April, so the problem that was supposed to require my cabin for 4 months had resolved itself in about 10 weeks, the way problems usually do, when the people with the means to solve them actually try. I didn't feel vindicated. I felt tired. And then slowly I felt something else. Something I'd been looking for when I bought the cabin in the first place. Settled, like load-bearing walls finding their final position. In April, Renata sent an email. Not a call. An email. She said she wanted me to know that she'd been angry and she'd handled things badly. She said she hadn't meant some of what she'd said on the voicemails. She said she hoped we could be civil. I read it twice. It was not an apology exactly, it was a flag of truce. But it was something. I wrote back a short reply. I said I appreciated her reaching out. I said that what mattered most to me going forward was Elliot and their family. I said I wasn't interested in being enemies. I didn't say I'd forgotten. I didn't say everything was fine. I said what was true. She replied with one line. Thank you for responding. Elliot brought the boys up to the cabin in late June. His sons, my grandsons, 8-year-old Franklin and 5-year-old Cal. Just the 3 of them. Renata stayed home, which I thought was probably the right call for everyone. We took the rowboat out in the morning. Franklin caught a small bass and was unreasonably proud of it. Cal fell asleep in the bow with a life jacket as a pillow and one hand trailing in the water. In the afternoon, we grilled on the porch. Elliot and I sat in the wooden chairs after dinner while the boys chased each other around the yard in the long summer light. Moths came to the porch lamp. The lake went pink and then dark. I've been thinking, Elliot said, about what you told me, about standing in your position. Yeah? I've been trying. With Renata. About some things. He looked at his hands. It's harder than I thought. It usually is. How did you learn to do it? I thought about that. 31 years of watching structures hold and fail, watching people who skipped the reinforcement step pay for it later. The slow accumulation of knowing that the math doesn't care about your feelings. I learned it the hard way, I said, same as everything else. He nodded. Franklin yelled something across the yard and Cal shrieked and they crashed together on the grass, laughing. Pure, uncomplicated noise. Elliot smiled. Thanks for not giving up on me, he said. You're my son, I said. That's not something I give up on. We sat until it was full dark and the stars came out over the lake. Hard and clear at that altitude, the way they get when there's no light competing with them. I thought about what it'd cost to keep this place. Not in money, in the harder currency of a family that had been bent to its limit and was now, slowly, finding its way back to level. I hadn't won anything. I just held the line, said no and meant it and not moved. Let everything else collapse that was going to collapse without my help. Sometimes that's the whole job. Cal woke up when we brought him inside. He looked up at me with that specific confusion of a child half asleep, not sure where he was. Grandpa's house, I told him. He nodded like that explained everything and went back to sleep. It did explain everything and went back to sleep. That's all it needed to do. I've been thinking about what actually happened here. Not the gate, not the deputy, not the certified letter. Those were just details. What actually happened is that Renata made a calculation and got it wrong. She looked at my cabin and saw unused space. She looked at me and saw someone who could be pressured into compliance. She moved her parents 300 miles on that assumption, and it cost all of them the rental trailer, the wasted day, the embarrassment of arriving somewhere you were never invited, the months of legal posturing that went nowhere. None of that was my doing. I just refused to confirm the calculation. That's the thing I keep coming back to. People who push the way Renata pushed, they're not actually reading you. They're reading the version of you they've decided exists. The version that will fold, because folding is easier. And as long as you stay quiet, as long as you say, let me think about it, or we'll figure something out, you are accidentally confirming their model. The moment you say no and mean it, completely and without apology, the model breaks. And then they don't know what to do. Renata didn't know what to do. That's why the calls got ugly. That's why there was a lawyer's letter. She wasn't escalating because she was winning. She was escalating because for the first time, the thing she expected to happen wasn't happening, and she had no other plan. What I learned from 31 years of engineering is that a structure either holds its load or it doesn't. There's no partial credit. You can't almost hold a bridge up. And a boundary is the same way. It either exists or it doesn't. The moment you start negotiating it, it stops being a boundary and becomes a suggestion. Suggestions don't hold anything. Elliot is the part of this I think about most. Not with bitterness. With something more like a father's specific sadness. The kind that comes when you watch your kid make the easy choice instead of the right one. He knew I'd said no. He let it happen anyway, because stopping it would have required a harder conversation with his wife than letting it roll toward his father. I understand that math. I've done versions of it myself, in smaller moments when I was younger. But understanding it doesn't make it okay. What gave me hope was that he called. That he said the word cowardly about himself, out loud, without me prompting it. That takes something. A kind of moral honesty that's harder than it sounds. You can't grow without it. You can't build anything real in a marriage or anywhere else without the willingness to call yourself out when you've gone wrong. Cal fell asleep in the bow of my rowboat this summer with his hand in the water. Franklin caught a fish and acted like he'd climbed a mountain. Elliot and I sat on the porch and didn't need to fill every silence. That's what holding the line bought me. Not victory over anyone, just the right to sit in my own chair, on my own porch, next to my son, watching my grandsons be exactly who they are. The cabin is still mine. The lake is still gray and cold in January and pink in June. Nothing was taken. That's enough. More than enough.